We're here to celebrate the publication of my new book, Sex and Psychotherapy. It came out this week from Routledge. Yes, okay. Sexuality, Passion, Love, and Desire in the Therapeutic Encounter. This book, I've been working on different sections of it for a number of years, and it's going to be a very nice day, but I'd like to start off by reading you just a little just-so story about sex. So this is the way the book starts. Here we go. Boy meets girl. Ages ago, the sun cast into orbit debris that, as it slowly cooled, turned into a molten mass with hardened rocky crust, the planet Earth, or the lithosphere. Following planetary rotations, oxygen and hydrogen gases alternately condensed into water and ice and then evaporated into mist and clouds, followed by aqueous precipitation, the hydrosphere. DNA molecules began reproducing themselves in the mineral-rich oceans, thus giving rise to viruses and one-celled organisms, the biosphere. Cells divided and multiplied into conglomerates of cells until a division of labor was accomplished, such that some organisms produced eggs and others produced sperm, allowing DNA materials to be mixed to produce genetic richness with survival value, the libidosphere. With the sexes defined, the pageant of the species slowly progressed through reptiles, mammals, and primates to produce the crowning flower of evolution, Homo sapien, a species that thinks, the noosphere. And so, boys and girls, men and women are naturally attracted to one another so that they can be married and have babies to perpetuate the species. The end. What I hope to show today is that virtually every person walking the planet today has a just-so story about sex and sexuality that is as hopelessly naive as the one I just read you. Not untrue, but simplified and naive. And it's our job as a psychotherapist to begin looking at these stories that other people tell us and the stories we tell ourselves, because our stories are just as hopelessly naive. And so today, the goal of today and the goal of my book is to bring sex, sexuality, gender identity out of the psychotherapy closet. For 110 years since Freud first began, we've been thinking we were working with sex, and suddenly in the last 2 decades, because of technology, we're aware that we have known little or nothing about sex or sexuality all these years. Even with the pioneering studies of the Kinseys, we're still using a certain mode of thinking about sex and sexuality. So I hope by the time that we leave here this afternoon, your sense of what on earth sex is about will be blown sky high, and you'll never again have any firm ideas about your sex or anybody else's sex or gender identity, but every day, all day long, you will be questioning it. And that'll be the goal of today, to blow sky high all of the just-so stories that we tell ourselves about sex and sexuality. Here's my contact information. Most of you know it already. I am in Orange, California. Manny, who you met when you came in, runs the Listening Perspective Study Center, and if there's anything that you need today, references or anything, you can call or email, and Manny will get it to you. My daughter Brita is doing the video camera, though you've seen videos of before, because I think a few years ago you saw the wonderful video of the ultrasound of her baby. And actually little Jaden Don Bell, who the book is dedicated to, should be here at lunch. So he's 2.5 now, running all over the place. So that's Brita. Now, today this is for us, it's not for the video camera. So don't be nervous about the camera. Brita's a very good editor. So feel free to stop me, to disagree, to raise your hands, and carry on just the way we always do, and not be bothered by the camera here. Okay. I do have to warn you, there's going to be a lot of erotic images from primitive art throughout the day. So if for some reason primitive art or erotic images offend you, try not to look at the screen. Okay. Many ways have recently emerged that allow us to expand our thinking about sex, sexuality, sexual identity, and erotic encounters. I'm going to define a series of emergent perspectives about sex and sexuality for illuminating sexualities as they appear in personal experience and in psychotherapy today. So there's going to be 8 perspectives. The first one is a historical perspective. We're going to look at the last 2,000 or 3,000 years in terms of ways sex and sexuality has been viewed, really coming to understand that the way we think about sex and sexuality is distinctly modern and distinctly Western. We're going to look at the natural or biological or the religious perspective, which will be sort of the way the patriarchies through the centuries have created concepts about sex that have been extremely limiting, concepts that we still live under and are ruled by. We'll be looking at the infant research. We have infant research that's massive, that's been possible through technology in the last 2 decades, that tells us all sorts of things about the forerunners to sensuality into the sexual encounter. Then we're going to look at personal identity as a perspective and just think through all the things we as psychologists know about identity formation, and then specifically sexual identity, realizing that our identities are well formed. We already know who we are long before sex ever enters the scene. So we'll look at that one. Then we're going to look a little bit at take a philosophical outlook on postmodernism and social constructionism as a way of looking at sex and sexuality, and ethnicity and sexuality. Now, one of the things we told them think about is how across various divides of what we call race and culture, across these divides there are all sorts of erotic encounters and erotic activities that we often don't even think about. Then we're going to go to the intersubjective perspective. Throughout the day we're going to be using that word. I'll define it in a few minutes, where what we see and want to do most is to know what's going on in the other person and to have the other person know what's going on inside of us. That is, we want to share intersubjective worlds, and we'll go all the way down to the infant researchers and see that at this point in time infant researchers assume that our drive for intersubjectivity is genetically determined. And yet we know in our most intimate sexual encounters, what we want to know most is, what is your experience? What is because we're all have organized our sexuality differently. Then we're going to be looking at the relational perspective. These last 2 perspectives are practically schools of psychotherapy right now. You're probably aware that the division of APA, American Psychological Association, Division 29, Psychotherapy Division, has recently conducted a task force putting together hundreds, if not thousands, of empirical studies about psychotherapy research, psychotherapy outcome. And while there's many variables that seem good predictors, the one variable that comes through with a resounding force is the variable of the relationship between the therapist and the client. That no matter what kind of therapy, no matter short-term, long-term, what school of therapy, that the key to the success and the movement is the relationship. And so we're going to be talking about what on earth is the relationship between the therapist and the client. And then, of course, we'll be assuming that sexuality is ubiquitous. It's around us all the time. It's a human attribute. And so in any encounter throughout the day, sexuality, gender identity are going to be factors that enter into the relationship in one way or another. And yet in psychotherapy, we've been extremely phobic. We've been hesitant to take that up. And I hope by the end of the day today, you'll be aware that these are things that we need to be able to think about ourselves, take up, talk with our clients, experience ourselves. Before we start on that, this is part 1 today. And then after part 1, what I've done is I've gone through the psychotherapy literature and I've called out 8 or 10 vignettes, clinical case studies, written by different well-known psychotherapists, psychoanalysts, that reveal some sexualized encounter between the therapist and the client, and how that sexualized encounter was worked with by these major theorists in our field. Then the last part of the day, this afternoon, I'll be looking at 3 longer-term case studies from my own practice. The first study is a study in erotic transference. A woman who had a transference to me that was highly erotic, and the way that she and I worked on it, in fact, not so successfully. The case was done some years ago, but we'll look at that and see how that went. Then we'll be illustrating resistance with 4 sessions that came from a man who was into bondage and discipline. And so as the noose tightened around my neck, the question was he going to be resistant to go forward if I didn't cooperate with his bondage, or was I going to be resistant to go forward if I couldn't play with him the way he wanted to be played with? It only went 4 sessions, didn't get off the ground, but it shows how resistance and counter-resistance play in sexual exchanges. The last one is also from my practice. It's an erotic countertransference with a man that I'd worked with for many years. And at one point in time, we actually have a sexualized encounter, and it opens up things for him. And the surprise ending of the day is what it opened up for me. Okay? All right. The historical perspective. Sigmund Freud, in his 1905 3 essays